The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stretched for nearly a kilometer in every direction. Its crystal walls caught and reflected the light from 1,000 different suns, creating rainbow patterns that danced across the polished floor. 847 seats arranged in perfect circles faced the central speaking platform, each one designed to accommodate the unique physiology of its occupant. Today, like every day for the past 150 years, one seat remained empty. Ambassador Zelix of the Centaurian Federation shifted his weight on his bio-cushioned chair and stared at the vacant spot. The nameplate still read, Earth-Terran Federation in the flowing script of Common Galactic. The chair itself was a simple design, built for bipedal humanoids of average height. Nothing fancy, nothing that would draw attention, just like the species it represented. The motion to establish new trade routes through the Vegan cluster passes by a vote of 600, and 12 to 193, announced Chancellor Zortac, his massive head swaying on a neck as thick as a tree trunk. The abstentions are noted. Zelix wasn't listening to the vote count. He was thinking about humans again. It had become something of an obsession over the decades, trying to understand why Earth remained so stubbornly isolated. Most species who joined the Galactic Council couldn't wait to dive into the vast ocean of knowledge and technology that membership offered. Advanced medical treatments that could extend lifespans by centuries, faster-than-light communication systems that made governing vast interstellar territories possible. Energy sources that could power entire worlds without environmental damage. But humans? They had politely accepted their membership package 150 years ago, signed all the required treaties, and then promptly ignored every invitation to participate in galactic civilization. Ambassador Zelix, came a melodic voice beside him. He turned to see Lyanna of the Crystalline Collective, her translucent body shimmering with internal light. You seem distracted today. The empty chair, Zelix replied, gesturing toward Earth's vacant seat. It bothers me. Lyanna's light patterns shifted to what Zelix recognized as amusement. Still thinking about the hermit humans? You know what they say about curious minds. They lead to discovery, Zelix finished. That's exactly my point. Humans were barely past nuclear fission when we found them. By all rights, they should be desperate for our help. Instead, they act like they don't need us at all. Perhaps they don't, suggested Lyanna. Some species prefer isolation. Zelix shook his head. No, it's different with humans. Most isolationist species at least send observers to our meetings. They want to know what's happening in the galaxy, even if they don't want to participate. But humans? They don't even seem curious. The truth was more complicated than Zelix realized. Humans were curious. They had been watching and listening to every Galactic Council session for the past century and a half. They just did it quietly, through methods the Council would never think to look for. High above Earth's surface, in a space station that appeared to be nothing more than an old communications satellite, Commander Sarah Chen monitored the live feed from the Council chambers. The image quality was perfect, transmitted through a network of micro-relays that human engineers had been placing throughout Council space for decades. Anything interesting today? Asked her aide, Lieutenant Marcus Webb, as he floated into the observation deck. Chen shook her head. Same as always. Trade disputes, territorial negotiations, and a lot of talk about nothing important. She paused the feed and zoomed in on Zelix. Though that Centaurian keeps staring at our empty chair, he's been doing it for months. Think he suspects something? Suspects what? That we're not the primitive species they think we are. Chen laughed. Marcus, they still think we're using chemical rockets to reach our moon. If they knew what we've really been building out here, they'd have a collective heart attack. Webb grinned. The Admiral wants to know if you've finished reviewing the latest intelligence reports. Chen's expression grew serious. Tell her I have. The situation in the outer spiral is getting worse. This Zortac empire she's worried about is expanding faster than anyone expected. Still think the Council can handle it? Chen looked back at the screen, where the Council members were now debating proper procedures for filing trade complaints. Look at them, Marcus. When was the last time any of these species fought a real war? They're talking about establishing committees to study the Zortac problem, while entire worlds burn. Back in the Council chambers, the session was beginning to wind down. Ambassador Zelix gathered his notes and prepared to leave, but his mind was still on the mystery of Earth. As one of the Council's senior diplomatic analysts, he had access to most of the files on member species. The human file was surprisingly thin. Earth's initial contact report described a world of nearly 8 billion humans divided into hundreds of separate nations. They had just developed nuclear weapons and were taking their first tentative steps into space. The evaluation team had classified them as potentially dangerous but manageable, due to their violent history and territorial nature. That evaluation was 150 years old. For most species, that was barely enough time for a single generation to mature. But humans had short lifespans compared to most galactic citizens. In the time since first contact, 6 or 7 human generations had been born and died. Entire civilizations could rise and fall in that time span, if the species was ambitious enough. So what had humanity been doing all this time? The official reports suggested very little. Human space traffic was minimal, a few cargo ships traveling between Earth and their nearest colonies. No exploration vessels venturing into deep space, no attempts to establish trade relationships with other species, no requests for technological assistance or cultural exchange programs. It was as if they were perfectly content to remain in their little corner of the galaxy, cut off from the wonders of advanced civilization. Zelix made a decision. Tomorrow he would request access to the most recent survey data on Earth. As a senior council member, he had the authority to order updated intelligence reports on any member species. It was time to find out what the humans were really up to. The next morning, Zelix submitted his request through official channels. Within hours, he received a response that surprised him. The request had been approved, but with an unusual note attached. Survey data limited due to restricted access to Sol system. Last detailed survey conducted 47 years ago. Restricted access? Zelix had never heard of any restrictions on Council survey missions. Member species were required to allow periodic inspections to ensure compliance with galactic law. It was a basic part of the membership treaty. He pulled up the relevant section of Earth's membership agreement and found the answer buried in subsection 47 of the technical annexes. Humans had negotiated an unusual clause that limited Council access to their home system. Survey missions could only be conducted with advance notice and human escort. All requests for such missions in the past 50 years had been politely declined due to internal security concerns. Internal security concerns? What could humans possibly have to hide that required such secrecy? Zelix decided to take a different approach. He contacted his old friend Kethlar, a Vorthan trader who specialized in exotic goods from the galaxy's outer regions. If anyone would have recent information about human space, it would be someone in the independent trading network. Zelix. Kethlar's image appeared on the communication screen, his forearms gesturing enthusiastically. How good to hear from you. What brings a fancy council diplomat to call an old smuggler like me? Information, Zelix replied. I'm trying to learn more about recent human activities. Have any of your contacts done business in Sol system lately? Kethlar's expression grew thoughtful. Sol system? That's human space, right? Strange you should ask about that. He leaned closer to the screen. I've got a cousin who runs freight through that sector. Says some weird things have been happening out there. What kind of weird things? Well, for starters, humans have been buying raw materials. Lots of raw materials. Industrial metals, rare earth elements, radioactive isotopes, stuff you'd use for major construction projects. But here's the strange part. They're not buying finished goods. No advanced technology, no manufactured items, just raw materials. Zelix frowned. That doesn't make sense. Why would they need so much raw material if they're not building anything? That's what my cousin wondered too. So last year, he tried to take a shortcut through Sol system on his way to the Centaurus trade stations. Figured he'd save a few days on the journey. And Kethlar's expression grew serious. Human patrol ships intercepted him at the edge of the system. Polite as always, but very firm. They escorted him around the entire system, rather than let him cut through. Took him an extra week to reach his destination. That's unusual, Zelix admitted. Most species welcomed peaceful travelers through their space. It was good for diplomatic relations and often led to profitable trade opportunities. Gets stranger, Kethlar continued. My cousin's ship has long-range sensors, military-grade stuff left over from his days as a coalition scout. He kept them running during the escort mission just out of professional curiosity. What did he detect? Energy signatures. Massive ones. Coming from all over the system. The asteroid belt, the outer planets, even Earth's moon. The kind of energy output you'd expect from major industrial operations? Zelix felt a chill run down his spine. What kind of industrial operations? The kind that require enormous amounts of raw materials, Kethler said quietly. Zelix, I've been trading in this galaxy for 3 centuries. I've seen species build everything from orbital habitats to generation ships, but I've never seen energy readings like that from a supposedly primitive world. After ending the call, Zelix sat in his office staring out at the traffic streams flowing between the Council's floating platforms. Ships from hundreds of different worlds passed by his window, each one a testament to the technological marvels that galactic civilization could achieve. Fast, elegant vessels that could cross interstellar distances in days. Beautiful constructions of living crystal, grown metal, and pure energy. But what if beauty and elegance weren't the only ways to build a civilization? Zelix pulled up the original First Contact reports on humanity and read them again with fresh eyes. The evaluation team had noted humanity's unusual approach to problem solving and their tendency toward robust rather than efficient solutions. At the time, these had been viewed as primitive traits that would be corrected through exposure to advanced galactic technology. But what if the humans had deliberately chosen a different path? What if they had looked at galactic civilization and decided they could do better? The thought was almost heretical. The Galactic Council represented the accumulated wisdom of nearly 1,000 different species. Their technology was the result of millions of years of combined research and development. Their social systems had been refined through countless generations of cooperation and mutual understanding. How could a single species isolated on one world possibly improve on that? Unless they weren't trying to improve on it. Unless they were building something entirely different. Zelix made another decision. He was going to request permission to visit Earth personally. As a senior council diplomat, he had the authority to conduct informal diplomatic missions to member worlds. If the humans were hiding something, a face-to-face meeting might reveal what it was. But as he began drafting his request, a priority alert flashed across his screen. The Zortac Empire had just launched a massive assault on the Milani star system. 300 council ships were moving to intercept. But early reports suggested the enemy force was much larger than expected. The galaxy's attention turned once again to war, and Earth's empty chair was forgotten in the face of more immediate concerns. In her observation post above Earth, Commander Chen watched the news feeds with grim satisfaction. The Zortac Empire was finally making its move, just as human intelligence had predicted months ago. Soon the Council would learn what humanity had already discovered. Sometimes diplomacy wasn't enough. Sometimes you needed something more than beautiful ships and elegant solutions. Sometimes you needed to be ready for war. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been running for 18 hours straight. Representatives from 847 worlds filled the Great Hall, their voices rising in a chorus of concern, fear, and barely controlled panic. The holographic display at the center of the chamber showed a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy, with red markers indicating Zortac Empire positions spreading like a disease across the outer spiral. Ambassador Zelix studied the tactical display with growing unease. In just 6 months, the Zortac had conquered 12 star systems and displaced over 2 billion beings. Their ships appeared without warning, demanded immediate surrender, and destroyed any resistance with brutal efficiency. Unlike previous conflicts in galactic history, this wasn't a dispute over trade routes or territorial boundaries. This was conquest for its own sake. The preliminary casualty reports from the Milani system are... Chancellor Zortac paused, his massive frame shuddering. They are beyond anything we have seen in living memory. The Zortac did not simply defeat the local defense forces. They systematically destroyed every orbital installation, every space habitat, every ship that tried to evacuate civilians. A wave of horrified whispers swept through the chamber. Ambassador Liana's crystalline body flickered with patterns of distress. How many survivors? Initial estimates suggest less than 10% of the population escaped before the system fell. Zelix felt sick. The Milani had been a peaceful species, known throughout the galaxy for their beautiful music and their skill at growing the living ships favored by many council races. They had no military to speak of, no weapons beyond basic police vessels designed to handle smugglers and pirates. What response does the Defense Committee recommend? Asked Representative Thurrock of the Rigelian Consortium, his cybernetic eye implants glowing with barely contained anger. Admiral Yastin of the Council Defense Forces stood at the central podium, her blue-scaled skin gleaming under the chamber lights. We are deploying the 3rd and 7th battle groups to establish a defensive perimeter around the threatened systems. Additionally, we are requesting all member species to contribute ships and personnel to a unified response force. How many ships will that give us? Someone called out. Approximately 1,500 vessels of various classes, Admiral Yastin replied. The Zortac fleet strength is estimated at 800 ships, so we should have sufficient numerical superiority to contain their advance. Zelix wasn't reassured by those numbers. He had spent the morning reviewing intelligence reports on Zortac military capabilities, and what he had read troubled him deeply. The enemy ships were built differently from Council vessels. Where galactic military design emphasized speed, maneuverability, and efficient use of energy, Zortac ships seemed designed purely for destruction. Their hulls were thick slabs of military-grade armor. Their weapons were crude but devastatingly powerful. They didn't rely on elegant shield generators or sophisticated electronic warfare systems. Instead, they simply mounted the largest guns they could fit and charged straight into battle, absorbing damage that would cripple a Council ship and fighting until they were completely destroyed. It was a military philosophy that most galactic species found barbaric and wasteful. But it was also proving to be terrifyingly effective. Admiral, Zelix said, rising from his seat, what do we know about Zortac naval doctrine? How do they fight? Admiral Yastin's expression grew uncomfortable. Their tactics are unconventional. They appear to favor direct assault over strategic maneuvering. Their ships are heavily armored but slow and poorly shielded. That should make them easy targets for our forces, suggested Representative Kolar of the Andromedan Union. In theory, yes, Admiral Yastin admitted. However, preliminary battle reports suggest that our standard energy weapons are less effective against their armor than expected. Their ships can absorb significantly more punishment than our tactical computers predicted. Zelix felt a chill. Are you saying our weapons can't penetrate their defenses? Not exactly. But it takes many more hits to disable a Zortac vessel than it would to destroy a ship of equivalent size built by any Council race. Meanwhile, their weapons are extremely destructive when they do hit. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The Council's military doctrine was based on the assumption that all species built ships roughly the same way: fast, efficient, and relatively fragile. Battles were typically decided by which side could land the first solid hits with their energy weapons. But if the Zortac had deliberately chosen to build slower, more heavily armored ships, they could absorb the Council's first strikes and close to a range where their own crude but powerful weapons could be devastating. What about requesting assistance from non-member species? Suggested Ambassador Liana. There are several independent systems with significant military capabilities. We have already approached the major independent powers, Admiral Yastin replied. Most are unwilling to commit forces to a conflict they see as a Council problem. A few have offered to sell us weapons and equipment, but the prices they're asking are ridiculous, finished Chancellor Zortac. The Hegemany Industries Consortium wants payment in refined antimatter. The Free Traders Alliance is demanding exclusive mining rights to 3 entire star systems. Even the normally cooperative Neutral Zone Assembly is asking for concessions we cannot afford. Zelix wasn't surprised. Independent systems had their own problems to worry about. Why risk their ships and crews in someone else's war, especially when they could profit by staying neutral and selling supplies to both sides? But there was one option no one had mentioned yet. What about Earth? Zelix asked. The chamber fell silent. Hundreds of representatives turned to look at him, their expressions ranging from confusion to amusement. Earth? Chancellor Zortac's voice carried a note of incredulity. The humans have never shown any interest in galactic affairs. What makes you think they would be willing to help now? They're a member species, Zelix replied. According to the Charter, all members are obligated to contribute to collective defense in times of crisis. The humans have never contributed anything to collective defense, pointed out Representative Kolar. They don't even attend our meetings. What could they possibly offer? Zelix thought about his conversation with Kethlar and the mysterious energy readings from Sol system. Perhaps more than we realize. The pre-contact surveys noted that humans had developed nuclear weapons and were naturally aggressive. If they've been building military forces during their isolation, with what technology? Admiral Yastin interrupted. Humans are still using chemical propulsion for most of their space travel. Their computers are primitive by galactic standards. Even if they wanted to help, their ships would be completely outclassed by Zortac vessels. We don't actually know what their current capabilities are, Zelix insisted. The last detailed survey of Sol System was conducted 47 years ago. A lot could have changed in that time. A lot could have changed for any primitive species in 47 years, Representative Thurok said dismissively. That doesn't mean they've developed anything useful. Besides, even if humans have built some kind of military force, what could they teach us about fighting that we don't already know? Zelix wanted to argue further, but he could see that he was fighting a losing battle. The Council's attitude toward humanity was too deeply ingrained. They saw Earth as a backward world populated by violent primitives who had somehow managed to avoid destroying themselves long enough to achieve spaceflight. The idea that humans might have something valuable to contribute to galactic civilization was simply unthinkable. Very well, Chancellor Vorthak announced. We will proceed with the conventional response. Admiral Yastin, you have the authority to coordinate the defense effort. All member species are requested to contribute ships and personnel according to their ability. As the session broke up into smaller committee meetings, Zelix found himself walking beside Ambassador Lyanna toward the exit. You really think the humans might be able to help? She asked, her internal light patterns showing genuine curiosity rather than amusement. I think we're making assumptions about them based on outdated information, Zelix replied. And I think those assumptions might be dangerous. Dangerous how? Zelix paused at the edge of the transportation platform. What if we're wrong about human capabilities? What if they've been building something during all those years of isolation, something we've never seen before? Then why haven't they contacted us? Why haven't they shown any interest in galactic affairs? Maybe, Zelix said slowly. They've been waiting for the right moment. Maybe they've been watching and learning, preparing for something like this. Lyanna's light patterns shifted to skepticism. You're suggesting that humans have been planning for the Zortac invasion? That's impossible. No one could have predicted this conflict. But even as she said it, Lyanna found herself thinking about Earth's empty chair in the council chambers. For 150 years, humans had politely declined every invitation to participate in galactic civilization. They had signed the minimum required treaties and then effectively disappeared from galactic politics. What species did that? What kind of civilization turned its back on the accumulated knowledge and technology of nearly 1,000 different worlds? Either humanity was completely uninterested in advancement and progress, or they were pursuing a different kind of advancement entirely. 3 days later, Zelix submitted a formal request to visit Earth on an unofficial diplomatic mission. His stated purpose was to explore the possibility of human assistance with the Zortac crisis. But his real goal was to satisfy his own curiosity about what the humans had been doing during their long isolation. The request was approved without much discussion. Most council members viewed it as a harmless waste of time. If Zelix wanted to spend his vacation talking to primitive humans, that was his choice. At worst, he would come back with some interesting stories about their quaint customs and backwards technology. At best, he might convince them to contribute a few obsolete ships to the war effort. But as Zelix prepared for his journey to Sol System, disturbing news continued to arrive from the war zone. The 3rd Battle Group had engaged a Zortac fleet near the Vegan cluster and suffered heavy casualties. Despite numerical superiority, the Council forces had been forced to retreat after losing nearly a third of their ships. The enemy's tactics were proving even more effective than feared. Zortac vessels would charge straight into Council formations, absorbing enormous amounts of damage while closing to point-blank range. Once there, their primitive but powerful weapons could punch through even military-grade shields and armor. Worse, the Zortac showed no interest in preserving their own ships or crews. They fought with a suicidal determination that most galactic species found incomprehensible. A council captain might retreat when his ship was badly damaged, hoping to fight another day. A Zortac captain would keep fighting until his vessel was reduced to drifting wreckage. Admiral Yastin's latest report was grim. The enemy appears to view their ships as expendable weapons rather than valuable assets. They are willing to accept casualty rates that would be unthinkable for any council race. Unless we can develop new tactics or acquire more powerful weapons, I fear we will be unable to stop their advance. Reading the report in his private quarters, Zelix felt a growing sense of urgency about his mission to Earth. The Council was facing an enemy unlike anything in galactic history, an opponent who fought with brutal simplicity and utter disregard for their own losses. Perhaps it was time to consult with a species that understood such things. Perhaps it was time to ask the humans for help. But first, he would have to find out what they had been building in the darkness between the stars. Ambassador Zelix's diplomatic cruiser dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Sol system, and immediately he knew something was wrong. His ship's sensors, some of the most advanced technology in the galaxy, were detecting energy signatures that shouldn't exist. The graceful Dawn was a masterpiece of Centaurian biotechnology, grown rather than built from living coral that had been shaped and trained over decades to form a perfect hull. Its sensors were organic neural networks capable of detecting the faintest traces of artificial energy from vast distances. They had never failed him in 3 centuries of diplomatic service. Now they were screaming warnings at him from every direction. Captain Vextar, Zelix called to the ship's pilot, a young Centaurian whose genetic modifications allowed her to interface directly with the vessel's nervous system. Are our sensors malfunctioning? Vextar's expression was troubled as she communed with the ship's senses. No, Ambassador. The readings are accurate, but they don't make sense. Explain. I'm detecting massive industrial complexes throughout the system, energy outputs consistent with planetary-scale manufacturing operations. But according to our files, humans shouldn't have the technology for anything like this. Zelix moved to the observation deck and stared out at the Sol system. At first glance, it looked much as he expected. A yellow star surrounded by the usual collection of planets and smaller bodies. Nothing obviously artificial was visible to the naked eye. But as the ship's sensors fed information to the display screens, the true scope of human activity became apparent. Earth's moon had been completely restructured. What had once been a cratered natural satellite was now a geometrically perfect construction of metal and ceramic, its surface covered with structures that could only be shipyards. The asteroid belt showed similar signs of massive engineering. Dozens of the larger asteroids had been hollowed out and converted into manufacturing facilities, their surfaces bristling with communication arrays and defensive installations. The energy output from these facilities was staggering, each one consuming more power than most planetary civilizations used in a year. My gods, whispered Vextar. How long have they been working on this? Mars gleamed with the lights of enormous cities sprawled across its surface. Orbital stations the size of small moons hung in perfect formation around the red planet, connected by streams of traffic that flowed in complex, precisely controlled patterns. And the ships. There were so many ships. They moved through the system like schools of metallic fish, following shipping lanes that had been carved out of space itself. But these weren't the elegant curved vessels that dominated galactic civilization. Human ships were massive, angular constructions that looked more like flying fortresses than spacecraft. They were also heavily armed. Even at extreme range, Zelix could see the distinctive energy signatures of military-grade weapon systems, not the sleek energy projectors favored by council races, but bulky, primitive-looking installations that nonetheless radiated enormous destructive potential. Ambassador, Vextar said nervously, we're being scanned. By whom? Unknown vessels. I count at least 6 ships moving to intercept our course. They're huge. The main display screen flickered to life, showing an incoming communication. A human face appeared, a woman with short gray hair and eyes like chips of ice. She wore a military uniform that Zelix didn't recognize, with rank insignia that suggested high authority. Unknown vessel. This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Fleet. You are entering restricted space. State your identity and purpose. Zelix stepped forward. Admiral Chen, I am Ambassador Zelix of the Centaurian Federation representing the Galactic Council. I request permission to proceed to Earth for diplomatic discussions. Admiral Chen's expression didn't change. Ambassador, your request is noted. Please maintain your current position while we arrange an escort. The transmission ended before Zelix could respond. Within minutes, 6 human warships had surrounded the graceful Dawn. Up close, they were even more intimidating than the sensor readings had suggested. Each one was easily 3 times the size of Zelix's ship. Their hulls covered in armor plating thick enough to stop asteroid impacts. They didn't look fast or maneuverable. They looked like they could ram through a planet and keep flying. Escort ships, this is Admiral Chen, came another transmission. Please guide our visitor to Station Olympus. Standard diplomatic protocols are authorized. The journey to Earth took 6 hours, and Zelix spent every minute of it studying the human ships through his sensors. What he discovered challenged everything he thought he knew about spacecraft design. Human vessels used fusion reactors instead of the antimatter systems favored by most galactic civilizations. Their weapons were kinetic rather than energy-based. Massive projectile launchers that could hurl chunks of metal at significant fractions of light speed. Their armor was simple but incredibly thick, layer upon layer of advanced alloys that could absorb enormous amounts of punishment. Most surprisingly, their ships were built to operate independently for extended periods. While Council vessels relied on regular resupply from orbital facilities, human ships carried their own manufacturing equipment, repair systems, and resource processing plants. They were less ships than they were mobile cities, capable of operating in deep space for years without external support. It's like they're preparing for a war that lasts forever, Vextar observed. Station Olympus hung in Earth's orbit like a small moon, its surface covered with docking bays, defensive turrets, and sensor arrays. As the graceful dawn was guided into one of the smaller bays, Zelix caught a glimpse of the station's interior through the transparent walls. It was enormous. The central chamber was large enough to hold a dozen Council capital ships, and it was filled with human vessels of every size and configuration. Sleek frigates designed for fast reconnaissance, massive battleships that bristled with weapons, strange angular craft whose purpose he couldn't even guess. But what struck him most was the sheer number of ships. There had to be hundreds of vessels in this one facility alone, and his sensors had detected dozens of similar stations throughout the system. How many ships did humanity have? Admiral Chen met him at the airlock, accompanied by 2 officers in the same unfamiliar uniforms. She was smaller than Zelix had expected. Humans were not a particularly large species by galactic standards, but her presence filled the corridor with quiet authority. "Ambassador Zelix," she said, extending her hand in the human greeting gesture. "Welcome to Earth space. I apologize for the security measures, but we've learned to be careful about unexpected visitors." "Quite understandable, Admiral," Zelix replied, taking her hand. Human skin was surprisingly warm compared to most species he knew. "I must say, your facilities are far more extensive than our records indicated." Admiral Chen smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Our records are probably out of date too. It's been a while since we had formal diplomatic contact with the Council." She led him through corridors that hummed with activity. Human technicians worked on equipment that Zelix didn't recognize, their movements quick and efficient. Everything he saw reinforced his growing suspicion that humanity had advanced far beyond what anyone in the Council imagined. "Admiral," he said as they walked, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but what exactly has Earth been doing during the past century and a half?" "Building," Chen replied simply. "Building what?" "Insurance." They entered a conference room with windows that looked out over the docking bay. From this angle, Zelix could see even more human ships than before, including several under construction. The partially completed vessels were already larger than anything in the Council fleet. "Ambassador," Admiral Chen said, taking a seat across from him. "Why are you here? Your message mentioned the Zortac situation, but the Council has never asked for our help before. Why now?" Zelix chose his words carefully. "The situation has become more serious than initially anticipated. The Zortac Empire is proving to be a more formidable opponent than anyone expected. Their tactics and technology are unlike anything we've encountered before." "How so?" "They build their ships differently. Heavily armored, heavily armed, designed to absorb tremendous amounts of damage while closing to point-blank range. Our standard weapons and tactics are proving less effective than hoped." Admiral Chen nodded thoughtfully. "Brute force approach. Quantity over quality. Accept heavy losses to achieve strategic objectives." "You're familiar with such tactics?" "We invented them," Chen said quietly. "At least we perfected them. There's a human saying, if you can't outthink your enemy, outbuild them." She stood and walked to the window. "Ambassador, let me show you something." At her gesture, the lights in the conference room dimmed and the window became transparent from both sides. What Zelix saw in the docking bay made his blood run cold. A human battleship was being prepared for launch. It was easily 5 kilometers long, its hull a massive slab of armor and weapons. Gun turrets the size of buildings dotted its surface. each one housing weapons that could probably destroy a council cruiser with a single shot. But the ship's size wasn't what terrified him. It was the number on its hull, TDS 47892. "Admiral," he said slowly, "that number suggests you have nearly 1,000 ships of this class." "That's just the Aurora-class battleships," Chen replied. "We have other classes too." Zelix felt dizzy. "How many ships does Earth have?" Admiral Chen turned to face him. "How many do we need?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Zelix realized that he was no longer thinking about humanity as a primitive species that might contribute a few obsolete vessels to the war effort. He was looking at a military force that could probably crush the entire council fleet without breaking stride. "Why?" he finally asked. "Why build all this? You've never shown any interest in galactic politics. You've never tried to expand beyond your own system. What's the point of having such massive military capabilities if you never use them?" Admiral Chen sat back down, her expression becoming serious. "Ambassador, let me ask you something. How many wars has the Galactic Council fought in the past 1,000 years? Major conflicts? Perhaps a dozen. Most disputes are resolved through negotiation and economic pressure. And how many wars has humanity fought in the same time period?" Zelix thought about it. According to the historical records, humans had been at war with each other almost continuously throughout their recorded history. I don't have an exact number. Many. "Thousands," Chen said. "We've been fighting each other for our entire existence as a species. We understand war in ways that most galactic civilizations have forgotten. But surely galactic civilization offers a better way. Peace through cooperation, prosperity through trade." "It does," Chen agreed, "as long as everyone follows the same rules. But what happens when someone doesn't? What happens when you encounter an enemy like the Zortac, who doesn't care about your rules and won't be stopped by economic sanctions?" Zelix had no answer for that. "We've been watching the galaxy for 150 years, Admiral Chen continued. "Learning about your technology, your politics, your military capabilities. And we realized something troubling." "What?" "You're not prepared for real war. Your ships are beautiful, your tactics are elegant, your weapons are efficient, but they're designed for fighting civilized enemies who follow civilized rules." She gestured toward the battleship in the docking bay. "Our ships are ugly. Our tactics are brutal. Our weapons are crude. But they're designed for one purpose: to win wars against enemies who refuse to lose." "You've been preparing to fight us," Zelix realized with growing horror. Admiral Chen shook her head. "We've been preparing to fight for you. There's a difference." She activated a holographic display that showed the current tactical situation in the war zone. Red markers indicated Zortac positions. Blue showed council forces. The pattern was clear. The enemy was winning. "Your latest intelligence reports suggest the Zortac will break through your defensive perimeter within 6 months, Chen said. "After that, they'll have a clear path to the core worlds." "How many billion beings live in the inner spiral, Ambassador?" "Nearly 1 trillion, Zelix whispered. "And how many of them will survive a Zortac occupation?" The answer was obvious. The Zortac had shown no mercy to conquered populations. They were expanding not just for territory or resources, but for the simple joy of conquest itself. "What are you proposing?" Zelix asked. Admiral Chen smiled, and this time it was genuine. "That it's time for Earth to take a more active role in galactic affairs." The emergency session of the Galactic Council was unlike anything in the organization's 1,000-year history. Representatives from 847 worlds sat in stunned silence as they watched the tactical displays showing the complete collapse of the Vegan defense line. In less than 72 hours, the Zortac Empire had shattered 3 council battle groups and captured 6 more star systems. Chancellor Vorthak's massive frame shook as he read the casualty reports. The 4th, 9th, and 11th battle groups have been completely destroyed. Admiral Yastin's flagship was lost with all hands. Remaining council forces are in full retreat toward the core worlds. Ambassador Zelix felt sick as he watched the red markers advance across the galactic map. Each Zortac symbol represented conquered worlds, enslaved populations, and billions of dead. The enemy was less than 50 light-years from the densely populated inner spiral, where the heart of galactic civilization lay exposed and defenseless. "What forces do we have left?" asked Representative Thurok, his cybernetic implants flickering with barely controlled rage. "Approximately 400 ships of various classes," replied Acting Admiral Kothron, who had assumed command after Admiral Yastin's death. But our remaining vessels are scattered across dozens of systems. It would take weeks to concentrate them into an effective fighting force. We don't have weeks, pointed out Ambassador Lyanna, her crystalline form dimming with despair. Intelligence reports suggest the Zortac will reach the Altarian system within days. Once they control that sector, they'll have a clear path to Earth, Centaurus, even the Council worlds themselves. The mention of Earth drew several looks toward the still empty human chair. For 150 years, that seat had been a symbol of humanity's stubborn isolation. Now it seemed to mock the Council's helplessness. Has there been any response to our request for human assistance? Chancellor Zortac asked. Zelix shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His diplomatic mission to Earth had ended 3 days ago, and he was still processing what he had learned. The humans have agreed to consider our request. Admiral Chen assured me that Earth is taking the situation very seriously. That's not exactly a commitment to help, Representative Kolar observed acidly. The humans don't make hasty decisions, Zelix replied, though privately he wondered if humanity would act at all. Despite the impressive military capabilities he had witnessed, Admiral Chen had been careful not to make any specific promises about intervention. A priority alert flashed across the chamber's main display. Acting Admiral Kothron's expression grew even more grim as he read the incoming message. The Zortac have launched a major assault on the Altarian system, he announced. Local defense forces are requesting immediate reinforcement, but our nearest ships are 6 hours away. How long can the Altarians hold? Asked Chancellor Zortac. Their orbital defenses were designed to handle pirates and smugglers, not a full-scale military invasion. I estimate they have perhaps 2 hours before the system falls. 2 hours. In 2 hours, one of the galaxy's most beautiful worlds would be added to the Zortac Empire's growing collection of conquered territories. The Altarians were a peaceful species, known for their poetry and their skill at cultivating the living ships that many council races preferred. They had no military tradition, no weapons designed for serious warfare. They would be slaughtered. Emergency motion, called Representative Thurok, rising from his seat. I propose we officially surrender the outer spiral to the Zortac Empire and establish a defensive perimeter around the core worlds. If we consolidate our remaining forces, you're suggesting we abandon 40 billion beings to save ourselves? Interrupted Ambassador Lyanna, her light patterns flashing with outrage. I'm suggesting we save who we can, Thurok replied coldly. The alternative is to lose everything. The debate that followed was ugly and desperate. Some representatives argued for a fighting retreat, using what remained of the Council fleet to slow the Zortac advance while evacuating as many civilians as possible. Others wanted to negotiate with the enemy, offering tribute or territorial concessions in exchange for peace. But everyone understood the truth that no one wanted to speak aloud. The Galactic Council was beaten. Their beautiful ships and elegant tactics had proven useless against an enemy that fought with brutal simplicity and total disregard for casualties. Unless something changed dramatically, galactic civilization would be extinct within a year. Incoming priority transmission, announced the Chamber's communication system. Origin, Sol System Terra. The hall fell silent. In 150 years, Earth had never initiated contact with the Council. They had only responded to direct messages, and even then with polite but non-committal replies. The main display flickered and showed a human face. It was Admiral Chen, but she looked different than when Zelix had met her. Her expression was harder, more focused. She wore a different uniform too, one that seemed designed for actual combat rather than diplomatic meetings. Honorable Chancellor Zortac, Admiral Chen said, her voice carrying clearly across the vast chamber. I am Admiral Sarah Chen, speaking for the Terran Federation. We have monitored the deteriorating situation in the outer spiral with growing concern. Admiral Chen, Chancellor Zortac replied, his voice carefully controlled. The Galactic Council appreciates Earth's concern. We would welcome any assistance humanity might be able to provide. Our assistance is already en route, Admiral Chen said simply. Terran Defense Fleet units are moving to engage Zortac forces in the Altarian system. We expect to arrive within the hour. The chamber erupted in confused voices. Zelix felt his heart racing as he tried to process what he had just heard. The humans were actually intervening. After a century and a half of isolation, They were finally taking action. "Admiral," Chancellor Zortac said, raising his voice above the noise, "we are grateful for any help Earth can provide, but I must warn you that the Zortac forces in the Altarian system are substantial. Our intelligence suggests they have committed nearly 300 ships to the assault." "We are aware of the enemy force composition," Admiral Chen replied. "Chancellor, the Terran Federation formally requests permission to assume tactical command of all Council forces in the affected sectors. Our fleet commanders have experience with this type of warfare." The request sent shockwaves through the chamber. For 1,000 years, the Galactic Council had controlled its own military operations. The idea of turning command over to an outside species, especially one that had never participated in galactic affairs, was almost unthinkable. But what choice did they have? "Admiral," Chancellor Zortac said slowly, "exactly how many ships is Earth sending to Altair?" Admiral Chen's expression didn't change. "Sufficient." The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. Finally, Representative Thurrock spoke the question that everyone was thinking. "What have we done?" In the Altarian system, the battle was already lost. The beautiful crystal cities that floated in the upper atmosphere of Altair Prime were burning, their elegant spires cracked and melting under Zortac bombardment. The planet's orbital defenses had lasted exactly 17 minutes against the enemy assault. Captain Thexmar of the Altarian Defense Force watched helplessly as the last of his ships was torn apart by enemy fire. His own vessel, the Singing Wind, was a graceful construction of living coral and shaped metal designed for exploration and peaceful patrol duties. Against the brutal efficiency of Zortac warships, it might as well have been made of paper. "All defensive positions have been overrun," reported his tactical officer, her melodic voice heavy with despair. "The orbital platforms are gone. The evacuation ships," she didn't need to finish. Captain Thexmar could see the wreckage himself on the display screens. Dozens of passenger vessels destroyed while trying to flee the system. Millions of civilians who would never see another dawn. "Signal all remaining ships," he ordered. "Concentrate on the flagship. If we can damage their command vessel, perhaps we can buy a few more minutes for the surface cities." It was a hopeless gesture, but it was all they had left. The 5 surviving Altarian ships turned toward the massive Zortac dreadnought that hung like a dark moon above their world. Their weapons, designed for ceremonial displays and minor police actions, sparked harmlessly against the enemy's thick armor. The return fire was devastating. The Star Dancer exploded in a ball of superheated plasma. The Dawn Chorus simply vanished, vaporized by a direct hit from the dreadnought's main guns. Captain Thexmar watched his fellow captains die and prepared for the same fate. Then space itself seemed to catch fire. The hyperspace emergent signatures were unlike anything Captain Thexmar had ever seen. Instead of the gentle ripples that marked the arrival of council ships, space tore open like wounded flesh. What came through was not elegant or beautiful. It was terrifying. The human ships arrived in perfect formation, their massive hulls gleaming with armor that looked thick enough to stop asteroids. They didn't glide gracefully through space like galactic vessels. They moved with the ponderous inevitability of avalanches, their engines roaring loud enough to be heard across the vacuum. Captain Thexmar counted 24 ships in the lead formation, each one easily 3 times the size of the largest Zortac vessel. Behind them came more formations, cruisers, destroyers, and strange angular craft whose purpose he couldn't identify. But it was the sound that would haunt his dreams for years to come. Human ships didn't operate in the respectful silence that most species preferred. They thundered through space like living storms, their weapons charging with deep harmonic vibrations that seemed to shake reality itself. The Zortac fleet, caught completely off guard by the sudden arrival, scrambled to respond. 300 enemy ships turned to face the human formation, their weapons powering up for what should have been an easy victory. After all, the humans had brought fewer than 50 vessels against an overwhelming numerical advantage. The opening exchange lasted exactly 47 seconds. When it was over, the Zortac fleet was debris. Captain Thexmar stared at his sensors in disbelief. The enemy ships hadn't just been destroyed, they had been obliterated. The human weapons fired solid projectiles at speeds that defied physics, kinetic rounds that punched completely through Zortac armor and continued into space. Energy beams that didn't just damage but disintegrated. The few Zortac ships that survived the first volley tried to flee, but the human vessels moved to intercept with surprising speed. What followed wasn't a battle, it was an execution. "Altarian vessels," came a transmission from the human flagship. "This is Admiral Marcus Webb of the Terran Defense Fleet. The immediate threat has been neutralized. Please maintain position while we secure the system." Captain Thexamar found his voice. "Admiral Webb, this is Captain Thexamar. We are grateful for your assistance. But how were you able to?" "We've had practice," Admiral Webb replied. "Captain, we're detecting survivors on your world's surface. Our medical teams are standing by to assist with casualty treatment and evacuation operations. Over the next several hours," Captain Thexamar watched in amazement as the humans methodically secured the Altarian system. Their ships moved with mechanical precision, establishing patrol routes and defensive positions with the efficiency of a military force that had been fighting wars for centuries. Which he realized they had. But the most impressive sight was the arrival of the hospital ships. Massive vessels designed specifically for medical operations, equipped with trauma centers that could handle thousands of casualties simultaneously. Human medics worked alongside Altarian doctors, their techniques crude but effective. They didn't just save lives, they saved hope. As the human fleet prepared to move on to the next crisis, Admiral Webb contacted Captain Thexamar one final time. "Captain, you and your people fought bravely today. The galaxy needs more warriors like you." "We are not warriors," Captain Thexamar replied. "We are poets and artists. We build ships for beauty, not war." "Sometimes," Admiral Webb said gently, "poets need protectors. That's what we're here for." The human ships departed as suddenly as they had arrived, leaving behind a system that was scarred but alive. As Captain Thexamar began the long process of rebuilding, he couldn't stop thinking about what he had witnessed. For 150 years, humanity had sat in the shadows building something the galaxy had never seen before. Not just ships or weapons, but a military philosophy based on one simple principle: overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. The humans hadn't just saved Altair. They had announced their arrival on the galactic stage in terms that everyone could understand. The age of elegant warfare was over. The age of human protection had begun. 3 months after the Battle of Altair, Ambassador Zelix stood in the observation deck of the Terran flagship Indomitable, watching the systematic destruction of the Zortac Empire's main fleet. Through the transparent aluminum windows, he could see the final battle of what historians would later call the Hegemony War, playing out in brilliant flashes of light and energy. It wasn't really a battle anymore. It was more like a demolition. The Zortac had assembled every remaining ship in their fleet for one last desperate assault on the core worlds. Nearly 800 vessels, the survivors of dozens of previous engagements, formed the largest enemy armada in galactic history. Their plan was simple: break through the human defensive line and reach the soft targets beyond. The plan lasted approximately 12 minutes. Admiral Sarah Chen stood beside Zelix, her expression calm as she watched her fleet systematically dismantle the enemy formation. The human ships moved with the precision of a clockwork mechanism, each vessel exactly where it needed to be at exactly the right moment. "How long have you been planning this?" Zelix asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Which part?" Admiral Chen replied. "The tactical deployment, the strategic positioning, or the entire war?" Zelix turned to stare at her. "You planned the entire war?" "We planned for the possibility of this war," Chen corrected, "along with about 50 other scenarios we considered likely." She gestured toward the tactical display that dominated the bridge. "Our wargaming computers identified the Zortac as a potential threat 47 years ago. We've been tracking their expansion and analyzing their capabilities ever since." The display showed the human fleet in perfect formation, a three-dimensional chess game played out across thousands of cubic kilometers of space. Each ship knew its role, its position, its target. There was no confusion, no hesitation, no wasted motion. It was the difference between an army and a mob. The Council Intelligence Services never detected their expansion until they started. "Conquering our worlds," Zelix said. "The Council Intelligence Services were looking for traditional threats," Admiral Chen replied. "Territorial disputes, trade conflicts, religious wars. You weren't prepared for a species that conquers for the pure joy of conquest." On the main screen, the last Zortac dreadnought exploded in a ball of superheated plasma. The enemy fleet was gone, reduced to drifting wreckage and expanding clouds of ionized gas. In 3 months of campaigning, the human fleet had destroyed over 2,000 enemy vessels, while losing exactly 17 ships of their own. "Admiral," called Captain Rodriguez from the communication station, "we're receiving surrender offers from the remaining Zortac colonies. They're requesting terms." "Standard occupation protocols," Admiral Chen replied without hesitation. "Military forces to be disarmed and disbanded. Civilian populations to be protected under martial law until stable governments can be established. War criminals to be identified and prosecuted. And their leadership? The Zortac Supreme Council will be tried for crimes against sentient life. If convicted, they'll spend the rest of their lives in a very small, very secure prison." Zelix found the casual efficiency of it all somewhat chilling. In 3 months, humanity had dismantled an empire that had terrorized the galaxy for years. They had done it with a combination of overwhelming firepower and careful planning that left no room for chance or error. But what disturbed him most was the realization that this had all been inevitable from the moment the first human ship entered the battle zone. "You could have ended this war at any time," he said suddenly. "You could have intervened years ago, saved billions of lives." Admiral Chen's expression grew somber. "Yes, we could have. But then what? The Council would have gone back to its old ways, convinced that someone else would always be there to solve their problems. The next crisis would have been handled the same way, with committees and resolutions and strongly worded protests." She turned to face him directly. "Ambassador, the Zortac Empire was a symptom, not the disease. The real problem is that galactic civilization has forgotten how to defend itself. So you let billions die to teach us a lesson?" "We let billions die while we made sure we could save trillions more," Chen replied. "The Zortac were never going to stop with the outer spiral. Our intelligence indicated they were planning to continue their expansion until they controlled the entire galaxy. If we had intervened earlier, we would have saved some lives in the short term, while ensuring far more deaths in the long term." The tactical display shifted to show the current disposition of human forces throughout the galaxy. Blue markers indicated Terran fleet positions, scattered across dozens of star systems in a network that covered nearly half of known space. "This is about more than just the Zortac, isn't it?" Zelix realized. "You're positioning yourselves to control galactic civilization." "We're positioning ourselves to protect galactic civilization," Admiral Chen corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there? From where I'm standing, it looks like humanity has just conquered the galaxy through superior firepower." Admiral Chen smiled grimly. "Ambassador, if we wanted to conquer the galaxy, we would have done it 50 years ago. We have enough ships to overwhelm every Council fleet simultaneously. We could have taken control of the core worlds, dissolved the Galactic Council, and established the Terran Empire before anyone knew what was happening." "Then why didn't you?" "Because empires fall. They always fall, usually from the inside. But protectorates—" She gestured toward the display showing human ships patrolling peaceful star systems. "Protectorates can last forever, as long as they continue to serve a useful purpose." The bridge's main communication system chimed with an incoming priority message. Chancellor Vorthak's image appeared on the screen, his massive frame somehow diminished by recent events. "Admiral Chen," the Chancellor said, his voice carefully controlled. "The Galactic Council has completed its deliberations regarding your proposal. By a vote of 738 to 96 with 13 abstentions, we formally accept humanity's offer to assume responsibility for galactic defense." Admiral Chen nodded. "We are honored by the Council's trust, Chancellor. Terran Defense Fleet units will begin deploying to patrol routes within the week." "There are conditions," Chancellor Vorthak continued. "The Council retains authority over all civilian matters, trade relationships, and internal governance. Human forces will respond to the Council's direction in all non-military matters." "Understood and accepted," Admiral Chen replied. "We have no interest in governing civilian populations. Our mandate is purely defensive." After the transmission ended, Zelix shook his head in amazement. "You've just been handed military control of the entire galaxy, and you're acting like it's a routine administrative matter." "Because it is," Admiral Chen said. "We've been preparing for this responsibility for 150 years. Every ship in our fleet, every officer in our command structure, every tactical doctrine we've developed has been designed for one purpose: to ensure that the galaxy remains a safe place for peaceful species to live and prosper. She led him to another observation window that looked out over the human fleet. Hundreds of ships stretched into the distance, their massive hulls gleaming with armor that could withstand almost any attack. But now Zelix could see beyond their intimidating appearance to the careful thought that had gone into their design. These weren't ships built for conquest. They were ships built for protection. The Council species are good at many things, Admiral Chen continued. You've created art that can move souls to tears. You've developed technologies that seem like magic. You've built civilizations based on cooperation and mutual understanding. But you've forgotten how to fight. And in a universe full of species like the Zortac, that's a fatal weakness. A junior officer approached with a data pad. Admiral, the casualty reports from the final engagement. Chen reviewed the numbers quickly. 17 Zortac ships escaped the battle zone. Total enemy casualties estimated at 400,000. Our losses: 3 ships damaged, no casualties. She handed the pad back. Have recovery teams sweep the battle zone for survivors. Any Zortac personnel who surrender are to be treated according to the standard prisoner protocols. As the officer departed, Zelix found himself thinking about the magnitude of what had just happened. In one afternoon, humanity had eliminated the last organized resistance of an empire that had terrorized the galaxy for years. They had done it with such efficiency that their own casualties were effectively zero. What happens now, he asked. Now we do what we've always done, Admiral Chen replied. We watch, we wait, and we prepare for the next threat. Will there be a next threat? There's always a next threat, Ambassador. The universe is a dangerous place, full of species that believe might makes right. The Zortac won't be the last empire to decide that conquest is easier than cooperation. She activated a holographic display that showed the entire galaxy, with human patrol routes marked in blue lines. The pattern was comprehensive, covering every major trade route and population center. But from now on, when the next threat emerges, the galaxy will be ready. Peaceful species can continue to focus on art and science and philosophy, knowing that someone else is watching the darkness between the stars. Zelix studied the display, trying to comprehend the scope of humanity's commitment. They were offering to be the galaxy's permanent guardians, its shield against the chaos of an indifferent universe. And the price for this protection? He asked. The price is accepting that sometimes violence is the only language that certain species understand. The price is acknowledging that elegant solutions don't work against enemies who prefer crude effectiveness. Admiral Chen's expression grew distant as she looked out at the stars. The price is letting humans carry the burden of being the galaxy's warriors, so that everyone else can remain civilized. 6 months later, Ambassador Zelix sat in the Galactic Council chambers, watching the first formal session since the end of the Hegemany War. The Great Hall was fuller than he had ever seen it, with representatives from dozens of species that had never bothered to attend before. The empty chair marked Earth-Terran Federation remained unoccupied, just as it had for the past 150 years. But now everyone understood why. Humans hadn't been absent from galactic affairs. They had been preparing for them. As Chancellor Zortac called the session to order, Zelix reflected on how much had changed. The galaxy was safer now, protected by a fleet of steel behemoths that patrolled the darkness between worlds. Trade was flourishing as ships could travel without fear of piracy or conquest. Scientific cooperation was at an all-time high as species no longer needed to divert resources to military buildups. But most importantly, every species in the galaxy now understood a fundamental truth about humanity. They were not warriors pretending to be diplomats. They were diplomats who had never forgotten how to be warriors. And sometimes, in a universe full of predators, that made all the difference. The age of elegant warfare was over. The age of human protection had begun, and the galaxy was safer for it. The humans had skipped every galactic meeting not out of disinterest, but because they were busy building something the galaxy desperately needed. A force capable of protecting peace through strength. The steel behemoths had finally revealed themselves, and they were everything the galaxy had hoped for and nothing like what they had expected. They were not conquerors or oppressors, but guardians who had chosen to bear the burden of violence so that others could live in peace. It was the most human thing of all, taking on the hardest job so that everyone else could have easier ones. And for the first time in galactic history, every peaceful species could look up at the stars and feel truly safe.